1930s, the hottest decade on record. The latest graph, nearly half of it based on fabricated data, shows that it was warming at a rate equivalent to 3 degrees centigrade per century. So in other words, they have been making all of this up. It is all fake. None of it is real. They've been using fake computer data to try and convince you that you need to give up your car, give up your air conditioner, and make sure that you don't use that aerosol hairspray. And this is science. These are the people who say that this is the party of science. These are not the deniers. These are the scientists. They know everything there is to know about science. Astonishing. Astonishing. President Obama continues, by the way, to push his global warming scare, because global warming, really, in the end, global warming is just a way to create a Marxist redistribution of global wealth. That's what it's really about. That's why, but remember, during his initial run for the presidency, President Obama actually said out loud, you can't keep your house at 72 degrees and expect everyone around the world to be okay with it. Well, I mean, I generally don't call some random dude in Uganda before turning my air conditioner down to 72. But President Obama thinks that we should, because it's unfair. Everything we do, according to President Obama, has externalities. Now, there are things in life that actually do have externalities. It turns out that using your air conditioner probably is not one of them. It does not have major externalities. Using your refrigerator, it does not actually create global warming. Driving your car is not responsible for the earth warming, because the earth isn't warming. Turns out the earth is getting colder, or at least the United States is, since the 1930s. And yet President Obama continues to push this lie that the world is warming, weather is becoming more dangerous, because you need a good crisis. This is what the Obama administration is now in the business of doing. Because whenever there's a crisis, somebody exploits it to gain power. There's never been a crisis in human history in which a powerful person didn't attempt to centralize power around him or herself. Every time there's a major crisis, a monetary crisis, for example, in Germany, that leads to a dictator. Right? When there was 9/11 is a great example. When there's a terrorism crisis, the government grows rapidly. We add a whole new department, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, which includes, of course, the TSA. All of our lives become more inconvenient. The government takes more authority. President Obama declared a healthcare crisis. And that means that we now have to solve that crisis by having the government take authority. The crisis of income inequality in Russia the crisis of feudalism was cured by communism. There's always somebody who is willing to take advantage of a crisis to grab more power. And President Obama is no different. He's just doing it on a multiplicity of issues. Gun crisis. Well, he'll take power on guns. Healthcare crisis. Well, he'll take power on healthcare. And, of course, global warming. That means that he will take more power in terms of regulating your daily activities in your daily life. Today, President Obama said that global warming was creating, quote unquote, hurricane intensity. He said global warming would make storms more costly, because this week he declared it National Hurricane Preparedness Week. As the climate continues to warm, hurricane intensity and rainfall are projected to increase, and we expect sea level rise to make storm surges more costly. That is why last year I issued an executive order directing the federal government to take coordinated action to prepare our nation for the impacts of climate change. He says that we're going to cut red tape. We will be committed to increasing resilience and investing in scientific research. Only one problem. It has now been more than 8 years since the last major hurricane landfall in the United States. That's according to the Washington Post. Such a streak or drought is unprecedented, going back to 1900. The previous longest span is only about 5.5 years. So we are now in a record-long hurricane drought. As the Climate Depot reports, 2013 marked the 17th straight year without warming of the planet. In his executive order on climate change last November, Obama warned that too much rain and also not enough rain dictated his executive action against climate fluctuations. This is what President Obama does. This is what the Obama administration does. And this is why they claim more authority. The EPA, of course, the Environmental Protection Agency, under President Obama, has attempted to seize more authority. They've attempted to claim that they want to, that they have the ability to regulate carbon emissions Now, the Clean Air Act suggests that they have the ability to regulate pollutant, but now the EPA was attempting to suggest that carbon dioxide, the stuff that you breathe out, is actually a pollutant. And therefore they can regulate your breathing and cows pooping and what kind of car you use. Well, today the Supreme Court mostly validated the EPA's plans to regulate power plant and factory emissions of greenhouse gases, but it did impose a few limits on the agency's reach. The justices said that the EPA could not rewrite specific standards written into the law, but they did agree that there was a way for the EPA to carry out its program. Justice Antonin Scalia said that the EPA is getting almost everything it wanted in this case. It sought to regulate sources it said were responsible for 86% of all the greenhouse gases emitted. Under our holdings, EPA will be able to regulate sources responsible for 83% of those emissions. So the rest of the media that you're hearing today is saying this is a big victory for conservatives, that somehow the Supreme Court fought a battle back against the Obama administration. Not true. Not true. The Supreme Court merely tailored around the edges. As we mentioned earlier on the program, we now live in an executive tyranny. The executive branch can do whatever the hell it wants. If they decide today that they're going to regulate the amount that you urinate without any sort of congressional legislation, you'd be hard-pressed to stop them. The court again reinforced its view that the Clean Air Act gives the agency the ability to regulate greenhouse gases. Sean Donahue represented environmental agencies in the case, and he said the decision makes clear that 7 of the 9 justices now hold that view. Scalia, of course, said that this is a power grab. He said that an agency does not have the power to revise clear statutory terms that turn out not to work in practice, but a majority of the court still found a way for all of this to work. Alito and Thomas dissented from the decision, and a lot of its plaintiffs are very upset today. The EPA is excited. They say the Supreme Court decision a win for our efforts to reduce carbon pollution. It allows the EPA, states, and other permitting authorities to continue to require carbon pollution limits in permits for the largest pollution sources. Great. Once again, John Roberts' Supreme Court doing yeoman's work in stopping executive overreach. Well, as we continue here on the Ben Shapiro Show, we'll bring you the latest from the situation in Iraq. Big debate breaking out over what to do there. Ben Shapiro Show, AM 770, KTTH, KTTH.com.
You're listening to The Ben Shapiro Show on AM 770, KTTH.
Well, the situation in Iraq continues to devolve, and it is uglier and uglier out there. Now, the newest report is that the judge who sentenced Saddam Hussein to death in Saddam Hussein's mass murder case, he has now been captured and murdered by ISIS, which is tremendously exciting and deeply disturbing, of course. ISIS is now taking over the country. They're actually releasing World Cup tweets. Got to give it to them for being culturally savvy. They're now taking advantage of the situation to show what kind of cool dudes they are. The Iraqi military apparently is now out of ammo as well. So in virtually every way, this is a disaster. John Kerry has headed over to Iraq. Supposedly, he will now talk the Iraqi military into fighting and will talk ISIS into stopping. The Iraqi military ran out of Hellfire missiles last week, according to reports. The U.S. is hoping to resupply the Iraqi government as hastily as possible. This is according to Breitbart. The new revelation leaves Iraq with a non-existent air force until they are able to resupply. Recently, ISIS militants have damaged 28 tanks and shot down 3 helicopters. Late Saturday, a strategically important border crossing town between Syria and Iraq, along with 3 other towns, fell into the possession of ISIS, the Islamic State in Iraq, and al-Sham, which doesn't just mean Syria, it also means Israel. The official said that ISIS was still making huge gains in territorial expansion. President Obama, however, says that there's no reason for the United States to get involved. We need to stay out of it.
The task now is to see whether Iraqi leaders are prepared to rise above sectarian motivations, come together, compromise. If they can't, there's not going to be a military solution to this problem. There's no amount of American firepower that's going to be able to hold the country together. And I made that very clear to Mr. Maliki and all the other leadership inside of Iraq.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. There's no amount of American firepower that can hold this together? Oh, you mean except for the fact that American firepower did hold that together? Now there may not be, because we would have to reinsert probably 25 to 30,000 troops in order to win the country back. But it's obvious that President Obama has no intention of doing that, saying things like, it's the government's responsibility. It's the Iraqi government's responsibility. Let's take note of something. Iraq was not pacified in full until 2007, 2008. So they've been basically a country for 6 years. 6 years after the United States was formed, we had the Shays Rebellion. Within the first 10 years of the United States' existence, we had Daniel Shays, who was rebelling against the federal government. Right? We also had the Whiskey Rebellion. Right? Both of those happened. The Shays Rebellion happened even before the Constitution was formally adopted. It happened in 1786 and 1787. That led to the military being called out. The Whiskey Rebellion happened in 1791 during the presidency of George Washington, right as the Bill of Rights was ratified. In other words, new countries have turmoil, serious turmoil, unless there's a large occupying army, as in Japan or Germany. When President Obama says, well, they just have to get their stuff together, and if we just work with them and tell them to get their stuff together, that'll do it. No, it won't. It especially won't do it when, imagine for a second that you are Nouri al-Maliki, you're the prime minister of Iraq. And forget the fact that you are a radical Shiite. Forget about that. Assume you're just a politician like anybody else. And here you are. You've got a constituency that is largely Shiite. And you've got people who are attacking you who are Sunni. And on your border, you have an entire Shia country that is desiring to come across the border, rush across the border, and turn you into a client state. And then you have the United States sitting outside providing you very little support and telling you that you need to leave office and form some sort of coalition with the Sunnis. What are you more likely to do? Welcome in the United States or turn to the Iranians? Obviously, the answer is turn to the Iranians, but President Obama doesn't care if Iraq just becomes the backyard for Iran. He's okay with that. He says, we can't do any of this for the Iraqis. We can't make any. We're not doing.
Ultimately, what I think the vast majority of Americans understand is that we can't do it for them. And we certainly can't redeploy tens of thousands of U.S. troops to try to keep a lid on a problem if the people themselves don't want to solve it.
Yeah, this is such bull. The same Sunnis who were attacking right now, who are joining up with ISIS and attacking the government, those same Sunnis were part and parcel of the Sunni awakening, right, which happened in 2007, 2008. As a result of the U.S. surge, they decided they wanted to take part in the common bargain that had now been struck. Now they've turned on the government with reason, and they're doing it because we pulled out. For President Obama to say that we can't do it for them, we're not doing it for them. We're doing it for us, because now ISIS is going to go in there. They're going to take over half the country. The Iranians are going to take over half the country, and both of those people are going to be attacking U.S. interests and allies. Now,